Thank you, Rebecca, and so good to get to meet all of you. I'm excited to be here today. The themes that were set up for the conference are a focus on actionable intelligence, a focus on contextualized intelligence, and that by combining these two aims, we do a better job at cyber resilience. So my comments today are going to be focused on those three aims, and I hope to deliver some insights and some potential tradecraft to you that can help you better accomplish that in your own spaces. So as mentioned, I represent the Center for Anticipatory Intelligence at USU. We are the first program in the nation to focus on anticipatory intelligence. And I'll pause on my next slide to sort of break that down and define it for you, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term. But we also have quite a number of ambassadors here today. So if you see a student walking around that just has an aura of unusually high intelligence and talent and motivation, they're one of ours. And so you can introduce yourself and learn a little bit more about the program. So we're really excited to have them with us walking around today. So just to break it out, I know I'm right now committing this in of too many words on a slide, but don't worry, I'm not going to read it to you. I'm going to let you read it yourself. I wanted to just provide these definitions to you to help draw a little bit of a comparison between traditional strategic intelligence, which of course is what I did during my career at CIA, and anticipatory intelligence. So the first item to note is that the definition of anticipatory intelligence and really its launch as a concept, at least its launch into the public imagination, happened in the 2019 National Intelligence Strategy. So if you want to sort of go back and reference that strategy, that's where you will find the original definition by committee of anticipatory intelligence. We have since lifted that definition and done some tweaking of our own. So if you were to draw a comparison between these two, one of the differences that you will see is that traditional strategic intelligence, and I'm going to be a little bit reductionist here, tends to focus on intentionality. So if you think of, CIA's case officer system or other major systems that are put in place for gathering intelligence, the driving questions tend to be, what is, fill in the bad actor, going to do next, right? Let's get ahead of their planning cycle. Let's get ahead of their intentions so that we can either interrupt those, prepare for them, whatever needs to be done. So there is a strong focus on intentionality and the causal link between intentional outcomes or intentional actions and outcomes. Now, if you look at the definition of anticipatory intelligence, it becomes, as Rebecca pointed out, embedded in complex systems, which means you may have an intentional outcome with a first order effect that may also be intentional, but then out of that, as it ripples through our shared system, you have second, third, fourth order effects that perhaps no one intended, but present security challenges to us nonetheless. So that's part of what we focus on, those second, third, fourth order effects that we all end up needing to deal with. But beyond that, we also focus on something called emergence in complexity thinking. So again, if we're going to be sort of overly reductionist, there are two different types of problem sets that as intelligence professionals, we are mandated to examine. The first are complicated, and that's represented on your slide. Complicated problem sets are bounded. They are bounded systems. So something like a Swiss watch, right? Or maybe your own internal communication system with its various nodes and edges. They're bounded, they are predictable. When something breaks down, you know how to fix it. That's a complicated problem. For most of us in this room, we no longer, or if we ever did, have the luxury of focusing on only complicated problems. Instead, most of our problems end up being complex. And the basic definition of complex is that these problem sets are interconnected, and the nodes that make up these problem sets are also interdependent. So what happens to one ripples through the system and impacts the others. Now, to make things even more difficult, these are also willful, adaptable actors that make up the nodes. So what worked yesterday may not work tomorrow because it did work yesterday and has now been discovered and people are actively working against it. So within this interdependence, it also means that a very small action in one part of the complex system can have disproportionate outcomes in another part of the system. Now, what this means is that for most of us, the tradecraft methods that we were trained on have sometimes limited utility. So if you think of even the word analyst or analysis, analysis approaches are entirely appropriate for complicated questions, where you can take the whole of something and break it into its component parts and better understand the thing because you understand its component parts. That strict definition of analysis does not, in fact, go very far in helping us with complex problems, which, because of their intertwined nature and because of the disproportionate outcomes that are possible within a complex system, don't lend themselves to understanding by simply breaking the system apart into its components and studying those individually. Instead, you have to study the interactions between those component parts. And so my ambition today is to introduce to you some of the tradecraft that we have developed as the lab school for anticipatory intelligence. When it was introduced as a definition in the 2019 National Intelligence Strategy, it was really introduced more as an aspiration than as a new mode of intelligence. And tradecraft, methods, a systematic approach, none of that had yet been developed to undergird this idea of anticipatory intelligence, becoming better at forecasting and also foresight, which I will talk about toward the end of the talk. And most importantly, getting closer to being able to anticipate emergence. For those of you who have studied complexity science or systems thinking, you know that emergence, by definition, is something that is an organic outgrowth of the collision of agendas within a complex system. Very, very difficult to predict, to forecast, to foresee, whichever definition you are exercising at the moment, and yet can present us with some of our sharpest and most important security challenges. So emergence, by definition, is not the product of intention. It is simply a phenomenon that occurs because of the collision of variables within a complex system. And so, kind of circling back to our goals for the conference over this next week, getting to actionable within our intelligence spheres, better contextualizing what is going on the threatscape, and thereby building more resilient cyber systems. This is the tradecraft that we have come up with to help you get there, get to those three goals. So let's start with the first one. The first one we call STRAT. And so, as you know, everything deserves a good acronym, right? So we call STRAT, and this focuses dead center on one of the goals, which is cyber resilience, or the resilience of critical systems. Now, the systems model that you're looking at was completed by an undergraduate student, so within your reach. Was completed by an undergraduate student. It is the Swedish nuclear energy system. So one of the things that we have found to be particularly valuable, and I love seeing it duplicated visually for each of your talks today, is to figure out how to model complex systems in a way that you can begin to get your head around them. Now, this is an art form, and I mean it in the absolute literal sense of that term. It is an art form, but one of the things valuable about depicting visually and in color and with different shapes and indicators of appropriate stocks and flows within a complex system, one of the things important about doing that is it uses a different part of your brain than when you're just thinking about a problem in prose, in words, or you are writing about it. And so one of the discoveries we have made with our students is that as they model the system that they are concerned about, new insights come to mind, new ideas, recognitions about particular vulnerabilities in that system are illuminated because they are depicting it visually. So that's the first step. The point here, as you can see from its title, is to identify a plausible set to this system. So pick from the known threats that you work on every day, pick one that's highly plausible, and then have it come at the system. When you do that, you'll end up evaluating the system in these 4 categories. So the first is the ability of the system to simply resist the attack. I know that probably for many of you, one of your most strident frustrations is getting people across your workforce to do the basic fundamental cyber hygiene type practices that would help you as the internal professional keep attacks from entering the system. It's a pretty constant source of frustration. Therefore, you also know that as you harden the system to those sorts of attacks, it can sometimes compromise functionality of that system, the agility of the firm that you work for, its ability to respond quickly or even just do daily business quickly, and therefore you get a lot of complaints pointed at your office. So for all of these 4 that we evaluate, it is with an eye toward what are the appropriate trade-offs. If you're going to harden your resistance, are you making the right kind of trade-off with basic functionality in your system? Now, the second one that you see on your screen of retention is after suffering an attack, what level of functionality does the system maintain? So how many of its basic functions are still delivered where they need to be delivered? The third one, as you might imagine, is quickness to recovery. And then the fourth that we evaluate is the brittleness of this system. Is it built for learning and adaptation so that after it's been hit, you can actually emerge on the other side of this experience stronger, smarter, faster, better in some way? Or is it so exquisitely built, so brittle, that after suffering an attack, it collapses on itself and has a really difficult time resurging in a way that learns from the process of being hit? So one of the recommendations in the literature that you may be familiar with is to practice friction on your own system, to build a system that is consistently learning from friction. Now, this can be a material system, but system also pertains to the humans who govern these internal systems. So are they agile? Are they able to learn from an attack? Are there moments built into the day or either to a quarter that allow people to get together and review lessons learned? So so those are the sorts of things that you're trying to examine when you evaluate this interesting fourth area of resurgence. And as a highlight, you can see there's a lot more to say about this. You get to hear it. So Scott Roberts and Chandler McClellan will be holding an entire workshop on the STRAT method, because it's one that we deemed of particularly high importance and utility for your work, for your profession. And so that will be at 3 o'clock today if you would like to seek it out. And then they can talk you through each of these particular identifiers of a resilient system, how they may apply to your work, and how to assess them. So I'll move on to the next one. This is my particular area of expertise, the cultural topography analytic tool. This was devised in concert with my colleague Matt Barrett, who is here with me today at CIA, and it was out of a really raw necessity. We did not, up to that point at CIA, have a structured analytic technique for evaluating and boiling out cultural variables that were important to an intelligence question. And so over years and years of refinement, we now have the cultural topography analytic tool. And this has been field tested over and over again and continues to surprise us in a positive way with just how useful it is at delivering insights. So for your particular work, here are the two areas I'm thinking of where this might be applied to what you do. So the first sort of pertains to the goal of contextualization of your work and of your incoming threats. Understanding what is just over the horizon because you better understand your adversaries. So applying this tool externally to a look at the main threat actors that are on your radar is really, really useful because it helps you understand what they may do next, what drives them. And for those of you who are in a policy position, perhaps most importantly, it helps you understand the sort of salient threats or rewards that may stop them. So we do this by examining 4 different categories. You look first at identity. Identity tends to be what we call the deep anchor that often drives other behavior, sense of values, your worldview, or what we call perceptual lens. So identity is really important. The next one focuses almost exclusively on behaviors. So norms is defined in a lot of different ways in the literature. We focus strictly on behaviors because that is usually the thing that we are attempting to change. Finally, values. Values for us is defined in a perhaps unusual way. As you know, if you ask any particular group what their values are, you often get a list of aspirational values or values along a moralistic spectrum. What we are concerned about, and this is its unusual definition, is what elevates status within this group? What do they in fact value? So beyond the purported values, the aspirational values, the company motto, whatever it may be, if you do a thing, if you are a thing, if you own a thing, what are those things that elevate your status within this group? Those are, in fact, the key values of this group. And once you identify that, then, if I'm going to say it in fairly bald terms, you know what to offer and you know what to threaten because you understand what the group actually values. So the fourth category is perceptual lens. We're all living in a space where, unfortunately, we have to grapple with what is real. And all studies of human nature indicate that we don't base our behavior, our activity in objective fact. We base our behavior, our activity in what we perceive to be reality. And so when you are going after a particular threat actor, objective fact is secondary. What they believe to be their own threatscape, their own security concerns, or the high profitability of a certain type of attack, what they believe to be in all of those categories matters far more than what is actually true. So in order to anticipate their behavior, you have to climb inside their perceptual lens, the way they view the world, the way they assign meaning, what they believe is threatening to them as an organization, and then you are closer to being able to narrow the scope of predicting their action. Now, you may wonder why this slide is formed as a landscape. One of the great luxuries and our favorite way to employ this tool is within a team. So if you have a team working on this and each team member is assigned a different stakeholder around a common problem, then as you work on the different perceptions, behaviors, sense of identity of these diverse stakeholders around a common problem, and then you combine your data, you can see where a sense of identity lines up or certain behaviors line up with each other across stakeholders. Those represent areas of particularly robust cultural traits, the kind of cultural traits that are likely to drive behavior for this group. The deep dips between them represent differences, cleavages. So sometimes in the intelligence community, we have stakeholders that are starting to work together, and we really wish they wouldn't. This is a terrific method for evaluating those stakeholders individually, combining the data, and seeing what buttons you would push to exploit the differences between those two groups and inhibit dangerous collaboration that may otherwise result in a more serious threat coming at you. That's the purpose of combining the data, and that's when you've achieved what we call a cultural topography, right? A landscape that helps you understand where you have really robust problems because your threat actors line up with each other, and where you have opportunities to exploit differences. Now that I've made this, a tool pointed at adversaries, you might think it's strange that I'm now going to turn the tool inward, because the other more consistent complaint I hear from cyber professionals, and honestly from intelligence professionals inside of private organizations with regularity, is that they discover a threat, that they discover a protocol that really needs to be enacted, and they cannot seem to communicate the urgency of this internally to their own organization. So their own organization's culture seems to be an inhibiting factor in doing their job well. So, believe it or not, this very method designed to evaluate our adversaries can be really useful in evaluating ourselves. Probably all of you in the room right now can think of at least one norm or a behavior internal to your organization that you would love to change, that you know is a bad idea, it is counterproductive, and you cannot figure out how to change it. So doing this kind of diagnosis internally can help you do a better job of smoothing out your communications with the wider workforce, of teeing off of key points of shared identity that will help your wider workforce be able to see why this new protocol is important. So all kinds of small problems can be solved, and large problems, by better understanding from a cultural lens your own internal work environment, and not just leaning into what we all like to call, rational behavior. Rational behavior, are you ready for it, is culturally encoded. All of us make cost-benefit decisions through a cultural lens. So to lean on this idea of universal rationality will not get you very far, but an in-depth study of your own internal culture may help you break that loose. All right, third area of tradecraft is looking at these two tools of forecasting and foresight. In complexity science and in systems thinking, these each carry a really specific definition. So for forecasting, our curriculum tends to lean into the groundwork that Phil Tetlock has developed with the Good Judgment Project. Probably many of you are familiar with that. We sort of lifted best practices out of his literature and his study, and then have morphed and tweaked it, and we test it every year over and over again by having a brand new group of students come in, and they have to make forecasting judgments which are time bounded. So I know as intelligence professionals, we really love to steer away from the word prediction. But at the end of the day, that is what most bosses actually want, right? They want you to be able to predict what is going to happen next. So these forecasting tools that I must emphasize are very near term, right? You're looking 2 weeks out, maybe 2 months out. By 6 months out, you're sort of stretching it. They're very near term, but it turns out you can get reasonably good at doing this. And again, I would like to emphasize, if undergraduates can do this, so can we all, right? And they are doing a really good job of it, and even more encouraging, get better at it with practice across the semester. So that's our starting point, is Phil Tetlock, if you want to reference his work. And if you want to know more about this, you're welcome to contact me, and we can point you to some other resources. The more difficult skill, and one that we continue to work on, is foresight. So foresight deals with what we were talking about earlier with complex systems. Foresight, its ambition is to be able to anticipate emergence from a complex system. And I will lean on the person we consider to be the godfather of anticipatory intelligence. So a shout out to you, Josh Kerbel, who captures the ambitions of foresight with this simple question that you see on your screen. What are conditions ripe for? It doesn't mean that it's going to happen tomorrow. It may not even happen a year from now. It may require some tipping point, some precipitating event, but conditions are ripe for this to happen, which makes it possible. So what would that look like, and how would you ever get your head around it? We have a number of different practices that we pursue and tradecraft that we are developing. I'm going to introduce just one to you, because when I come to a keynote or a workshop, I really like to leave with at least one can-do item in hand, something I can take back to the office, sit down with my team, and actually do it. Like I've learned something and now have a tool. So I'm going to introduce one of these tools to you that we developed within the center. And for starters, it's just fun to say. Like, say it in your mind to yourself right now. Prifactor, convergence, emergence, that's fun to say. So the idea here is that sometimes when we're dealing with complexity and we're trying to get better at foresight, our efforts are bounded by the variables within that complex system that we are most familiar with. And so this particular exercise is designed to push you a little bit and force you to deal with a random set of variables, maybe things outside your comfort zone, things you are less familiar with. So in doing so, it delivers at least two really important helps. in moving toward actionable instead of reactionable intelligence and contextualizing the threatscape. So here are the two. First, it helps identify intelligence gaps. So as you go through this exercise and realize how much you don't know about some basic nodes in the complex system, that's a nudge to go out and research those with a little more depth. Secondly, it improves mental agility and helps you to start developing cognitive tools beyond analysis. Because as you will see as we walk through this exercise, this is something different than analysis. This is looking at complex systems and teasing out those interdependent, interlocking kinds of relationships between nodes in the system. So it's really important that however it is that you set this up, there is a degree of randomness to it. So the way we do it when we practice this with students is just to take The Economist magazine and a pair of dice. And you roll the dice, and whatever the dice land on, that's the page number you turn to. And whatever issue is being covered on that page number, that becomes your first variable. And you do that 3 times, so now you have 3 variables to work with. And the nice thing about The Economist is there's this sort of geopolitics section and a technology section and a biology section and an arts section. So you get kind of a nice variation of 3 factors that you're dealing with. But over to you on how you do this. I was thinking about this on your behalf this morning, and I was thinking, you know, maybe you could turn to 3 different podcasts, and maybe it's important to have at least one of the variables be something to do with your own organization. So, for example, you know, I was sort of listening to the news this morning, and one thing that caught my attention was the disappearance of a significant number of VPNs from India. Maybe some of you followed that story this morning as well. So this curious disappearance of VPNs from India. So you could make that one of your factors. One of my students just published on Houthi maritime attacks. So maybe you have a tech factor, and then you have something out of geopolitics be your other factor. So we're gonna put Houthi maritime attacks. And then the third one could be something specific to your particular organization. Maybe you choose the data that was compromised through Salt Typhoon. Maybe you choose a particular supply chain that you know you need to get a deeper window on. So you choose that as your third. Then, now you've got the 3 on your table. You look at the connections or possible connections between these 3 random items, and out of those connections, you extract a potential outcome or scenario. So what could happen from the collision of those 2 things on the world stage? What's a highly plausible outcome? And then you arrange some outcomes. Now, after that, this does start to look like a hairball, because then you work on the next set of connections and the next set of connections, and you don't have to do this in a particularly symmetric way. That's not how complex systems are built in any case. And so you just build connections upon connections, continuing to look at possible outcomes. So now you're teasing out 2nd, 3rd, 4th order impacts. Now, you're not going to get this exactly right. That's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is to start thinking more broadly and contextualizing your threatscape in ways that you haven't thought about before. Introducing variables into your mind, into your conversation that you haven't thought about before, and beginning to identify serious intelligence gaps that may end up impacting your own system. So trifactor convergence, the convergence of the initial 3 that may produce emergence, right? Something that ends up being a significant security challenge for you at some point down the road. So looking at that particular problem set, the reality of the complex landscape that we all now inhabit, how do you arrange yourselves? So this is a point where I'd really love to provide a shout out to Rebecca and Scott Roberts for their terrific book. If you haven't picked it up, I am doing that book plug for you because it's really, really terrific book on cyber threat intelligence and sort of how to position yourselves as a team for today and, more importantly, for tomorrow's threats. And they spend a fair amount of time talking about the team, which is completely appropriate. And I salute them in drawing in the mental health aspects of today and tomorrow so that you are taking good care of your internal team. The aspect of team that I want to talk about right now is the makeup of the team. So one of the huge advantages we have at Utah State as the lab school for anticipatory intelligence is that both in our undergraduate degrees that we offer and also in our masters of anticipatory intelligence, we recruit from every different major. So at last count, before I came out here, looking at last year's cohort compared with this year's incoming cohort, we have over 50 different majors and minors represented. We have everything from landscape architect students to computer science students. We have aerospace engineers and students who study folklore. That kind of diverse expertise on a team allows us to accomplish unusual levels of insight. And it helps us get closer to truly applicable solutions, highly tailored to the problem set, without missing really important dimensions of the problem and therefore important dimensions of the solution. So a huge advantage. To the extent that you can replicate that kind of advantage internally on your team, inviting diverse voices in, inviting in experts that you're not sure how their expertise pertains to your problem set, but you'd really just love to hear from them. It will grow and widen your mental agility. It will grow and widen your resource base for when you are tackling these problems. And as we have discovered, will help produce unusually valuable insights. Now, a core component of this, we talk a lot about having diverse teams. We talk a lot about leaning into each other's expertise. But when you actually practice it, it has a double positive impact. First, it humbles you a little bit. You realize by rubbing shoulders with these folks, in fact, how narrow your expertise is. And that modesty is really important in our profession because it forces you to get out there and invite other resources and invite other voices into the room to talk about the problem. The second piece is that as we learn from what has been written on anticipatory intelligence, which, by the way, is a pretty thin literature at this point. You can make your way through most of it this afternoon. So it's an exciting place to be, right? We get to be pioneers in this field. But one of the core principles is that the solution has to match the problem. So whatever team you put together to react to a complex threat has to be complex enough itself to mirror the threat, or your solution will be too small. So that's another driving factor that I hope inspires this kind of outreach and invitations into your team. As you play as a team, one of the other positive impacts that comes out of it is just flat out more meaningful work. So when we first put this program together at Utah State, my colleague Matt Barrett used to say, we're going to get these students from all of these different majors, and it's going to feel like you showed up to a family reunion and it's not your family, right? You don't know how to talk to these people. You don't know what to do. It is awkwardness all day long, every day, because people are coming from such different paradigms and you're putting them all in the same room. I am happy to report to you that we did not call that correctly. So instead, what we have found is that when you get really diverse voices in the room with really different cognitive styles, different areas of expertise, they end up collaborating with more enthusiasm, really leaning into each other, really appreciating what each person brings to the room. So my original station at Utah State was teaching political science. And anytime you have all of one area of expertise in the room, what you get is jockeying, right? Who is better at this? Who is smarter at this? Who has the edge? So it is a little more competitive atmosphere. When you have students from every different discipline in the same room, much of that competition just goes away and they are really excited to collaborate with each other. And I would love for you to get to have that in your work life, that enthusiastic collaboration. It means that you get to hang on to the best talent. We are lucky to attract the best talent from across Utah State University. And part of it is the skill set that we teach, but the other part of it is being a part of something that highly collaborative and getting to network with such interesting people well outside of your area of expertise. That draws students and it keeps them. And so as you think about drawing in talent and keeping the best talent, forming teams that are truly effective at addressing these problems because they're getting ahead on the actionable piece. They understand the context and landscape of the threatscape a little more clearly. They feel smarter at their job, more capable, more able, and you have figured out how to communicate with top management, right? All of those things make for a more meaningful work environment. And I would love for everyone to have the chance to experience that. So thank you for hanging with me through this introduction of tradecraft. Very excited to get to know you over the course of these 2 days at the conference, and I'm happy to invite your questions.